Let me ask you guys a bunch of questions. Have you ever been to San Francisco and seen these conjoined KFC Taco Bell restaurants? Have you ever driven through the Sacramento metropolitan area and noticed a conjoined KFC A&W? Well, Caden has, and anyone seeing this video might have similar yet different experiences. You might be curious about why these combo restaurants exist and what's going on. Well, there are a few YouTube videos that flesh out the companies that own these brands, but there are very few video essays about these combo restaurants. It's about time that changed. I'm Radar Overseer Scotty Peters, the Radar Overseer Scotty of Caden Van Seal's YouTube channels, and I'm going to talk about Yum brands and how they have been making single restaurants out of 2 to 3 brands of chains. I'll be going over the history of the big 3 chains, and bring in few but important events about chains that are no longer part of Yum brands, or have recently been acquired. A YouTube user named Business Casual already made a video that did that, but there are a lot of factors that he left out, which I will incorporate. And unlike him, I won't be going through every restaurant one by one. I'll be going in a strict timeline covering events in order of the years. Without further ado, let's begin. I'll start off with A&W, which began as a root beer stand in 1918/1919 and sold other foods. In 1925, 4 years after White Castle formed and began the modern fast food industry, A&W introduced franchising, which has been a beneficial factor of the industry since then and still is today. Now, a YouTube user called Company Man already made a video about Colonel Sanders' true and tragic story, but here are the important details. In 1930, as a result of the Wall Street crash bringing forth the Great Depression, Royal Dutch Shell had to sell useless gas stations. One of them was near northern areas of Corbin, Kentucky, and Harlan Sanders, who has worked a multitude of jobs, left a number of them out of boredom, and got ousted from the rest, would purchase the station. With him in charge, he would keep it a gas station and add in extra services like tile baths, steam heat, and catering, which we'll focus on. At the cafe, he, having learned culinary practices in his youth, would serve customers country ham, steaks, and the one dish that would have a role in his future, fried chicken. Sanders became a local celebrity as a result. He would also serve customers from his adjacent quarters and buy nearby buildings to expand his business and include more tables. In 1935, Rudy Lafoon, the governor of Kentucky at the time, rewarded Sanders for his culinary contributions by making him an honorary Kentucky colonel. This was sometime before December 10th of that year, when Happy Chandler succeeded him. 4 years later, in 1939, his building was destroyed in a fire, and he rebuilt it with a motel addition. In 1940, Sanders would perfect his secret recipe for his chicken. He did so via a mixture of 11 herbs and spices and a method that made use of pressure cooking. In 1945, as we shift away from Colonel Sanders for a moment, American soldiers returned from Italy, giving pizza popularity as a dish. We'll come back to that later. 3 years later, in 1948, which Business Casual thought was 1946, Glenn William Bell II, a Marine veteran who cooked for them as well and saw the horrors of the Second World War firsthand, wanted to bring some happiness in his life. He did so by opening a drive-in called Bell's Drive-In in San Bernardino, serving hot dogs to customers. 4 years later, he would sell his restaurant and open a second location that would serve hot dogs and hamburgers. That same year, Colonel Sanders, having been rejected 1,009 times according to some sources, would finally franchise his chicken recipe to a Mormon named Leon Weston Harmon, who would generally be called Pete Harmon, and owned a restaurant in southern areas of Salt Lake City in Utah. Harmon would be involved in the creation and trademarking of the name, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and the tagline, "It's finger-licking good." Meanwhile, back in San Bernardino, throughout the years 1952 to 1955, Glenn Bell would notice long lines at a Mexican restaurant across the street from his drive-in. This restaurant still exists today and is called the Midla Cafe, the pronunciation having the I as an E sound and the TL being the voiceless lateral affricate. Bell would eat at the cafe regularly and feast on their tacos. he would reverse engineer their recipe and become friends with the owners, who would introduce him to the art of taco making. As a means of competing against the McDonald brothers, he would add tacos to the menu of his drive-in and eventually sell it. In 1955, Bell would first experiment with a Mexican fast food restaurant by opening one called Taco Taya, which would still serve hamburgers. And I know I mispronounced Taya when the I is an E sound. In 1956, going back to Colonel Sanders, who got 6 more franchisees involved with his business, he would sell his North Corbin business as a result of Interstate 75 becoming a thing and start touring the U.S. to look for more franchisees. In 1958, going back to Bell, he would start opening another Mexican fast food business known as El Taco. Like Taco Taya, there would be multiple restaurants of the name and brand owned by the same person, and Bell would be a minority shareholder in the business. That same year, pizza parlors would still be a rare sight, most commonly seen in Italian-American communities. Inspired by this fact, and convinced by a real estate agent about the promises of a pizza business, Dan and Frank Carney, borrowing $600 from their mother and quickly learning about how to cook pizza and operate businesses, opened a pizza shop on the Wichita State University campus. Because the building looked like a hut, it was called the Pizza Hut. Several months later, that same year, more locations would open. The following year, the Carney brothers would get their first franchise, contract in Topeka, eventually leading to many Pizza Hut stores having a red roof. In 1960, KFC would have 200 franchised restaurants, and in 1962, Bell would sell his stakes in Taco Taya and El Taco and open the very first Taco Bell in Downey, California. This building is now called Taco Bell Numero Uno. Then, in 1964, the old Colonel Sanders would sell KFC to Jack C. Massey, who was convinced by John Y. Brown to purchase it. This resulted in Colonel Sanders gaining $2 million. That same year, Taco Bell got its first franchise in Torrance, in the South Bay area of Los Angeles County, California. By 1966, Pizza Hut would gain 145 restaurants. And between then and 1971, they'd go international and expand into Canada, Germany, Australia, Japan, and the United Kingdom. In 1969, 2 new restaurants were formed. The first of them was Long John Silver's in Lexington, Kentucky. The second one was The Habit in Santa Barbara, California. The following year, Taco Bell, having 325 franchised restaurants, would get listed on Wall Street. Another year later, in 1971, Pizza Hut would be the largest pizza chain in the world, having 1,000 restaurants. They would get listed on the stock exchange as well the following year. Also in 1972, KFC would be sold to Uline. Now, this is where PepsiCo comes in. Already the owner of several brands of food and drink, they, during the late 1970s, made a successful prediction of the restaurant business's future in emerging U.S. franchise chains and got their hands on every chain they could. They purchased Pizza Hut in 1977 and Taco Bell the following year, though they weren't done yet. In 1982, R.J. Reynolds bought out Uline, gaining KFC as a result, though PepsiCo would buy out KFC in 1986 for $850 million. Evidence of their ownership of these restaurants during the late 80s to the late 90s can be found in their funding credits on PBS.
Every day we enjoy people being cold to us, cutting us up, getting fresh with us, tearing into us, and calling us chicken. In fact, the more people do it, the happier we are. PepsiCo. And by PepsiCo.
And by PepsiCo. PepsiCo.
There are multiple editions of that third one with different classical scores, but we'll focus on the history. PepsiCo donated funds to the McNeil Lehrer NewsHour on PBS from 1989 to 1994, and in 1997, they, feeling the restaurant business was becoming unpredictable, decided to spin off their restaurant branch into a separate company. This would lead to the creation of Tricon Global Restaurants. 2 years later, in 1999, with Long John Silver's filing for bankruptcy, A&W would buy it out and form Yorkshire Global Restaurants. Starting from 2000, Tricon in Yorkshire would strike a deal and create multi-branded locations, leading to the creation of 83 KFC A&W mixtures, 6 KFC Long John Silver's hybrids, and 3 Taco Bell Long John Silver's combo joints. This would be the beginning of the restaurant co-branding we've been seeing throughout America. In 2002, Tricon would buy out Yorkshire and become Yum Brands, gaining A&W and Long John Silver's as chains alongside the core three. From there, more co-branded restaurants would be opened. One type would be a combination Pizza Hut Taco Bell, leading to the creation of an internet meme. Eventually, there would be hybrids of the core three, which would be referred to as Kentacahuts. In 2011, Yum Brands would spin off A&W and Long John Silver's as their own companies, resulting in the creation of a Great American brand and LJS partners. You could look at videos of the A&W Long John Silver's mixtures and slash or go nearby them if you have those adjacent to you to know their fate. In 2016, Yum Brands spun off their Chinese restaurants into a separate company, leading to the creation of Yum China. It is unknown if they'll adopt the co-branding strategy for their chains, yet one can speculate the hypothetical co-branded restaurants. And recently, in 2020, Yum Brands bought out the habit, getting them back in the burger business since 2011, when A&W was spun off. If Yum Brands is still practicing co-branding or decides to bring it back, there could be mixtures between the habit and KFC, Pizza Hut, and or Taco Bell. It is unknown to me and Caden what exactly gave Tricon in Yorkshire the idea to practice the co-branding of restaurants, and we're hoping that company man makes a better video essay that includes those specific reasons, as well as the future of that strategy. I'm Radar Overseer Scotty Peters, and I'd like to conclude by saying that all this could give you guys an idea about co-branded restaurants that exist, and co-branded restaurants that might eventually become a thing.